Now, the Pooh Shiesty and Gucci Mane situation is still making headlines, as Pooh Shiesty has reportedly been denied bond and remains in police custody over the alleged kidnapping of Gucci Mane. At the same time, Gucci Mane has already responded, dropping a track addressing the situation, and in that track he makes it pretty clear how he sees it, framing it as betrayal, even calling it a crash dummy move. But putting all that aside, the real question is, why exactly did Pooh Shiesty allegedly turn on Gucci Mane, and why does it feel like this was bound to happen? Before we really get into that, let's quickly recap what actually happened here so everyone's up to speed. About a week ago, a story started circulating involving Gucci Mane and Pooh Shiesty. The headlines were crazy for obvious reasons. You had a situation where what was supposed to be a business meeting between the two rappers allegedly turned into something way more serious. On January 10, 2026, Gucci Mane flew into Dallas, Texas with his team and security to meet up with Pooh Shiesty and talk business. At the time, Shiesty had reportedly been unhappy with his contract and wanted to have a conversation with Gucci Mane in person, but what started as a normal meeting quickly turned into something else. According to reports, once they got inside the studio, things escalated during a private conversation about the deal. Shiesty allegedly tried to force his way out of the contract by pointing a gun at Gucci Mane so he could be released from the contract. Gucci refused. The situation became heated. From there, multiple people entered the building, and what was supposed to be a discussion turned into a robbery. Gucci Mane and members of his team were reportedly held at gunpoint, forced to hand over jewelry, cash, and other valuables, while also being pressured to sign this paperwork. Eventually, everyone involved left the building, and the situation was later reported to police. And once investigators started looking into it, things began to line up quickly. Surveillance footage, vehicle tracking, phone data, and even fingerprints all started connecting people to the scene. And what made it even more serious was the fact that Pooh Shiesty was already under strict conditions at the time, including an ankle monitor, which reportedly placed him directly at the location. He didn't even try to hide it, and that tells you everything about the mindset he was operating from. Now, obviously, this whole situation was extremely reckless on Pooh Shiesty's end, so foolish, and it ended up costing him, because not long after getting out, he ended up right back in jail. And as of right now, Pooh Shiesty is facing life in prison alongside the other men involved in the situation. Which brings up the real question people have been asking. Why did this happen? On the surface, the answer seems simple. He was unhappy with his contract and wanted out. But when you really look at how everything played out, it feels like there's more to the story, because situations like this don't usually escalate to that level over business alone, especially when both sides understand how the industry works. The music industry has contracts, lawyers, processes. None of that involves coercion, or it shouldn't, right? So when something like this happens, it usually points to something deeper than just a disagreement. It points to how a person is wired to solve problems, and even in Gucci's response, you can hear that same perspective. Everything is framed around business and how this situation crossed the line. Now, when it comes to these two and how everything even started between them in the first place, Pooh Shiesty years ago had already been building a name for himself locally, gaining attention in Memphis and slowly expanding his reach. And then around late 2019 into early 2020, that's when things really started to shift for him. After dropping a few singles, he caught the attention of Atlanta rapper Gucci Mane, who eventually decided to sign him to his label, 1017 Records. Not long after that, in April 2020, the situation turned into a joint venture deal with Atlantic Records, which took things to a whole different level for his career. However, right after getting signed to Gucci Mane, things weren't exactly smooth behind the scenes. Because while Pooh Shiesty's career was starting to take off, he was also dealing with serious legal issues. One of the biggest incidents happened in October 2020. He was arrested in connection to a shooting in Bay Harbor Island, Florida, an incident that left 2 men hospitalized. At the time, he was facing multiple charges, including armed robbery with a firearm, aggravated battery, and aggravated assault. According to the arrest report, this all started as what seemed like a normal meetup. One of the victims said he was there to sell Pooh Shiesty a pair of shoes, while the other said he was there to sell him some marijuana and collect a payment for a rented lime green McLaren. But things escalated very quickly. One of the victims said he was sitting inside Shiesty's car when 2 men approached with guns, and as he was getting out, he was shot in the buttocks. The second victim said he heard gunshots while walking back to his car, and when he looked up, he saw Shiesty in the driver's seat, allegedly pointing a rifle at him, telling him, "Don't try it," before driving off. Both victims were able to make it to the hospital, but what really stood out was what was left behind. Police say Shiesty fled the scene but left behind a Louis V bag filled with cash. And when detectives looked deeper, they found photos on his Instagram, him with the same McLaren, the same bag, and even cash with serial numbers that reportedly matched money found at the scene. And that's important because it shows the way he was moving at the time, without much concern for how it could come back to haunt him later. And when you fast forward to the Gucci Mane situation, where investigators were able to piece together basically everything through footage, tracking, and digital evidence, it starts to feel less like 2 separate incidents and more like the same pattern playing out on a bigger level. And this was all happening while he was signed to Gucci Mane's 1017 label, which makes the situation even more interesting from a business perspective. Eventually he got out on bond, but it didn't stop there, because in 2021 he got into more trouble, this time involving a shooting at a strip club in South Florida. According to reports, a security guard was escorting him out of the club when money fell out of his pocket, causing a crowd to rush and try to grab it. That's when things escalated. Shiesty reportedly got upset and went back toward the stage, and at that point the guard notices a gun in his waistband. The guard tried to calm the situation down, even attempting to stop him from reaching for it, but as he was being escorted out, Shiesty allegedly pulled out a firearm and fired a shot, hitting the guard in the ankle. The guard later said he had to jump out of the way, which likely prevented him from being hit in the torso, and that could have ended very badly. After that, Shiesty left the scene with his entourage. Now interestingly, the security guard later stopped cooperating with the authorities, so he basically recanted his statements. But despite that, the situation didn't go away. Shiesty eventually took a plea deal where he admitted to being involved in multiple incidents, including a prior shooting involving a car in Memphis, and of course, along with the shooting that happened in Bay Harbor, and the strip club shooting in Miami. So when you really look at the timeline, around the same time he was signed by Gucci Mane, he was also building a certain kind of reputation. And you already know how that goes in hip-hop, the image, the energy. It doesn't just stay in the streets, it becomes a part of the brand. And in a way, all this was feeding into his rise. His career was growing, his name was getting bigger, but at the same time, everything around him was getting more serious. And that's the part people don't always think about, because when that lifestyle is what's bringing attention, what's building your name, there's really no reason for you to separate yourself from it. If anything, it's being reinforced. And that's where things start to get complicated, because at a certain point, that same energy that helps build an artist's image can also start affecting how they move in real situations, especially when real money, contracts, and control get involved. That all came to a halt in April 2022, when he was sentenced to prison. He was initially facing up to 20 years, but ended up receiving 5 years and 3 months. And after serving time, he was eventually released just a few months ago. But instead of taking advantage of that opportunity and just living a regular life, you got money, you good, bro, what's going on? Instead of moving differently after that, he ends up allegedly holding Gucci Mane at gunpoint. And that's the part that really confuses people, because from the outside, it feels like it came out of nowhere. But when you look at everything leading up to this moment, maybe it wasn't as random as it seems. And keep in mind, this is someone who was locked away while his name was still generating a substantial amount of money, streams, attention. The label's still benefiting from everything tied to him. So when you come back into that situation with real money involved, real contracts, and questions about who actually owns what, you come back with a problem. But you don't come back with a lot of leverage to fix that problem. And that's when things can start to shift. Because to really understand how a situation like this even happens, you have to look at both sides. And this is where things get interesting, because on the other side of the situation, you've got Gucci Mane. I'm sure most people already know or have an idea of how he came up and the kind of background he comes from. This is someone who's been through real life situations, including beating a murder charge early in his career. Back in 2005, Gucci Mane was visiting a female friend at an apartment when things suddenly took a turn. According to witness accounts, a group of men forced their way inside, and the situation quickly became violent. They allegedly threatened him, assaulted him, and even pistol whipped his friend. At that point, a struggle broke out, shots were fired, and one of the men was killed. Gucci Mane ended up killing this man. He went by the name of Pooh. His body was later found nearby. Gucci Mane turned himself in shortly after, maintaining that he acted in self-defense, and in January 2006, the case was eventually dropped, with authorities stating that there wasn't enough evidence to pursue it further. So when you look at Gucci Mane's story, this isn't someone who just came into the industry clean. For years after that, by the way, Guap was in and out of legal trouble with multiple arrests and situations that kept him tied to that lifestyle. Between 2005 and 2010 alone, he was incarcerated 5 times. But over time, things started to change. Gucci Mane eventually turned his life around. He of course lost weight, specifically that lean belly he had, became fit, stepped into a different role, became a business owner, a CEO, cleaned up his image, and moved differently. But here's the part that people don't always think about. The image Gucci Mane built during those early years, that just didn't disappear. That became part of his legacy. And that's exactly what a lot of younger artists grew up watching, including Pooh Shiesty. I mean, Pooh Shiesty openly even talked about being influenced by Gucci Mane, his music, his image, everything that came with that. But the version of Gucci they were watching wasn't the businessman. It was the version of him that was still in the streets. So even from the start, they were not looking at things the same way. Gucci at this point in his career had already evolved, moved into a different mindset, while Shiesty was still coming up, still a young guy, still figuring things out, influenced by that early version of him. So when you really break the situation down, Shiesty isn't just a random artist in this story. In a lot of ways, he's a product of the environment and the image that was already set before him, long before he ever got signed. And that's where things start to separate. But at the same time, Gucci Mane isn't the same person anymore, because now, business-wise, he's operating as a CEO. And you can see that in how he's moved over the years. Back in 2007, he launched his label 1017 Brick Squad, which is what later became 1017. Over time, he signed major names like Waka Flocka, Young Thug, and played a huge role in shaping that side of the culture. But like most things in the industry, those relationships didn't always last. Artists came and went, and the label itself went through changes. Then years later, after everything he had been through, he rebranded. And around 2020, he started building things back up again, signing a new wave of artists like Fujiano and eventually Pooh Shiesty himself. But in the middle of all that, there were already a bunch of conversations starting to surface about how Gucci was handling business. Over the years, multiple artists who had been signed to him had spoken out about issues behind the scenes, contracts, expectations, and how things were being managed.
Let me tell you about WAP. This type here, like, bruh, I don't fuck with how, like, you ain't really pushing the nigga, like, you know what I'm saying? The new niggas fool, he wasn't pushing us how he was pushing Shiesty number. Yeah. He told me personally, he was like, I don't really build a relationship with my artists, like.
Now, whether all of that was true or not, that's a separate conversation, and of course, you can make up your mind, right? But the fact that those conversations existed at all, that's what matters. Around that same time, there are also reports that the label itself was going through changes, so Gucci Mane was looking in the books and his company was in the negative now. Gucci had a full roster of artists, but not all of them were producing results. As a matter of fact, the majority of them weren't. So eventually he started cutting people off one by one, letting multiple artists go and focusing on a smaller group instead.
Now looking at my P&L and me being a businessman, I think that I'm gonna have to release almost all my artists except for Pooh Shiesty and Fujiano. This is a decision I didn't want to make. I thought about it, you know what I'm saying? I could keep all of them under the contract. Let's just make the unselfish decision and, let them take their talents elsewhere.
But then there's another layer to this, something people in hip-hop have talked about for years, and it's referred to as the Gucci Mane effect or the 1017 curse. Now, whether you believe that or not, the pattern is hard to ignore. But basically, a lot of his artists have ended up in serious situations. A lot of them have ended up in jail, and a lot of them have actually lost their lives. They're dead. One of the most talked about cases was Memphis rapper Big Scar, who was actually Pooh Shiesty's cousin. He got signed at 1017 in 2020. 2 years later, in December 2022, he passed away after an overdose.
This is about a Memphis rapper connected to Young Dolph. Rapper Big Scar has died.
And this was someone Pooh Shiesty grew up with, someone he considered his brother, on the same label, gone.
Big Scar passing away, like, I could agree with me being in there and having some alone time to think. I could really agree with it, but like to this day, I still ain't really got over that.
Pull up on Willie, cause we will let your ass have it.
And the whole time, Shiesty was sitting behind bars, watching all of this happen in real time. Then not long after that, a former 1017 artist, Enchanting, who was once signed to Gucci Mane, also passed away in 2024 due to drug toxicity. And it doesn't stop there. Other artists tied to the label have faced serious legal issues, including charges related to violence and long prison sentences. So when you take a step back and look at everything, the environment around this label has been complicated to say the least. Gucci Mane essentially signed a number of artists who already came from troubled situations. And while that energy helped create a certain image, it also came with real consequences because over time, it doesn't just affect the artist. It starts affecting the business. Opportunities get limited. Situations get messy and everything becomes harder to manage long term. And this is where the real disconnect starts to show. Because while that image might benefit the music, the business obviously doesn't operate the same way. And that's a big reason why Gucci Mane eventually started parting ways with a lot of these artists he had signed. Because on one hand, there's a connection to that world, that culture. I mean, Gucci Mane has always been seen as a street rapper, right? And that's what he is. But on the other hand, it still comes down to business. And it looks like Gucci was just done letting the streets interfere with the bag at a certain point. And I think that's where the real issues start. The mixing of those two worlds, street expectations and business reality, is what leads to situations like this. Because let's be honest, seeking out artists with that kind of background can actually be beneficial because it creates authenticity, builds a certain image, and connects with the audience in a real way. But at the same time, that same energy can be unpredictable. And when that spills into business, that's when things start to fall apart. Gucci built his brand off that world. Then over time, he outgrew it. But a lot of the artists he signed were still in it. And that's exactly what makes situations like this almost inevitable. I'm sure you heard this quote, you can take a man out the streets, but you can't take the streets out of that man. You can't change somebody who's not willing to change by placing them in a completely different environment and expect things to just line up. At some point, those differences start to show. If you made it this far, drop a like on this video and subscribe if you're new here. My name is Blacky Speaks, nice to meet you. I'm curious, what do you guys think about why Pooh Shiesty allegedly turned on Gucci Mane? Do you have any theories on that? Y'all let me know in the comment section below, and I'll catch you guys in the next one, man. Peace, I'm out.